You people don't belong here. The insult cracked across the city street like a whip. The words came from a man in his early 40s, dressed in a sharp navy suit,
This is an outrage.
face
I
hard
will
with
not stand
contempt.
for it.
Before
This
anyone
quarter's
could process
performance
the
is
sting of his
unacceptable,
language, his hand
and these
lashed
numbers
forward.
prove it.
The
We
slap
need a new
echoed off the
strategy,
glass towers,
now.
sharp and humiliating, landing across the cheek of the woman who stood before him. She was in her early 30s, calm, collected, wrapped in a light grey suit that radiated quiet authority. Her head snapped slightly with the impact, but she did not stagger. She did not cry out. She simply fixed her eyes on him, steady, unyielding, refusing to give him the satisfaction of breaking her dignity. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Dozens of bystanders, most in their late 20s and 30s, raised their phones. Screens glowed as cameras began recording, capturing every frame. Cars slowed in the background, drivers craning their necks. The city noise seemed to pause for this single, brutal spectacle. The man's lips curled into a sneer. This world isn't built for people like you. You'll never lead. You'll never own. You'll never matter. His voice was venomous, his body leaning into her personal space with a swagger meant to crush. Two men, both in their late 30s, stepped forward. Dressed in dark, tailored suits, they grabbed her by the arms, pressing her still as though she were the aggressor. Their expressions were professional, almost detached, but their presence added weight to the humiliation. The crowd murmured louder. Some whispered in disbelief, others shook their heads, disgusted. But no one intervened. Phones were easier to raise than voices. She inhaled slowly. The sting of the slap pulsed across her cheek, but her chest was calm, her posture unshaken. Her silence drew more attention than any outburst could. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to beg. The fury in her eyes carried centuries of stories, unspoken but undeniable. The man pressed on, as though her stillness provoked him further. His finger jabbed toward her chest. Parasites, that's all you are, feeding off what you'll never earn. This city doesn't need your kind. His words dripped with superiority, each syllable a strike meant to wound deeper than the slap. People in the crowd gasped again, some covering their mouths, others whispering, "Is this really happening?" A young woman held her phone higher, zooming in, whispering, "This is going viral." The black woman remained motionless. She was not broken. She was not defeated. She was building a storm inside her chest, quiet but unstoppable. Her arms stayed at her side, her eyes locked on her attacker. No one knew her name yet. To them, she was another target, another victim of public degradation. But the cameras captured her silence, her defiance, her refusal to yield. The man thought the slap had silenced her. He thought the insult had erased her. What he didn't know was this: he had just triggered the beginning of his own fall. The silence after the slap stretched thin, like glass about to shatter. The woman's cheek still burned, but she refused to lift her hand to it. She would not give him that power. The man in the navy suit smirked, folding his arms across his chest, as though he had already won a battle that hadn't even begun. "You should be grateful I even bothered to notice you," he sneered. His voice carried easily across the open space, bouncing off the buildings. He was in his early 40s, accustomed to being obeyed, and every inch of his posture screamed arrogance. The two men holding her arms, both at least in their mid-30s, bodyguards in tailored suits, shifted uncomfortably as the crowd pressed closer. They weren't used to being watched so intently by dozens of phones, every gesture caught and immortalized on shaky screens. The murmurs of the crowd were growing, louder, bolder. "Did he just slap her?" someone whispered. "This is insane." "Keep filming," another muttered. "People need to see this." Her gaze never left him. The insult still echoed in her ears, but she replayed his words like chess moves, cataloguing each one. She knew men like him, powerful on the surface, hollow underneath. Every cruel word revealed his fear more than his strength. Finally she spoke. Her voice was steady, low, commanding. "One day you'll regret every word you just said." The smirk on his face faltered for a split second. He hadn't expected her to speak with such calm authority. He leaned closer, his tone mocking. "Regret? No, darling. Regret is for the weak. And you." His hand gestured dismissively toward her. "You don't even belong in this building, let alone this city." The crowd gasped again, phones raised even higher. A woman in her 30s pushed forward slightly, her voice trembling with anger. "Why are you treating her like this? She hasn't done anything." The suited man snapped his head toward the bystander, his glare sharp enough to cut. "Stay out of this." His voice was louder now, meant to intimidate not just her, but everyone watching. The black woman took another slow breath, steadying herself. Her arms were still pinned by the bodyguards, but her composure was unbreakable. "You think humiliating me in front of strangers makes you powerful?" she said, her tone rising, each word deliberate. "All it does is show them who you really are." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Someone muttered, "She's right." Another added, "This guy's finished." The tide was turning, subtly but surely. The man's face reddened. He had expected fear, maybe even tears. But instead, he was losing control of the narrative. He turned sharply to his bodyguards. "Get her out of my sight." But the guards hesitated. For the first time, their eyes flickered toward the crowd, toward the dozens of witnesses holding glowing screens. Removing her by force would not go unnoticed. Their grip on her arms loosened ever so slightly. She caught that hesitation, and her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of knowledge, a signal to herself that the balance was shifting. Her voice cut through the air once more, calm but razor-sharp. "The world is watching, and soon they'll know exactly who I am." The crowd stirred. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. Phones zoomed in. Some faces showed outrage, others awe. The woman wasn't just a victim anymore. She was becoming something else, someone stronger, someone unforgettable. The man clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He had started this scene believing he was in control, but now, under the unblinking gaze of the public, he was beginning to realize control was slipping away. The air felt electric, as if the very street were holding its breath. Dozens of cameras remained locked on the scene, the glowing rectangles of smartphones turning the confrontation into a stage. And on that stage, the man in the navy suit refused to let go of his performance. "You're nothing but an intruder," he barked, his face red with fury. "You think standing here makes you important? It doesn't. You don't matter. You never will." His words were sharp, but there was a crack in his delivery. His voice, once booming with confidence, wavered ever so slightly. The crowd heard it, and they noticed. The black woman, her cheek still burning from his slap, stood rooted like stone. She was in her early 30s, yet her presence carried the weight of someone who had endured decades of being underestimated. Her silence was not submission, it was power. A man in his 40s, standing among the crowd, muttered loudly enough for others to hear, "Why is he going so far? She's not even fighting back." Another, a woman around 35, whispered, "No, she's fighting differently." The bodyguards holding her arms shifted again. Their grip was loose now, hesitant. They were in their 30s too, old enough to know reputations could be destroyed in seconds. The crowd wasn't just watching, it was recording history, and they wanted no part of the wrong side. The man sneered, trying to reclaim dominance. He jabbed a finger at her chest, his spit flying with every syllable. "People like you are parasites, feeding off what others built. You think you can stand beside me? You'll always be beneath me." Gasps and groans rippled through the crowd. A man near the front raised his phone higher and shouted, "Keep talking, everyone's watching you dig your own grave." Laughter broke out in pockets, not at her expense, but his. For the first time, the man's eyes flickered. He scanned the crowd, realizing the energy had shifted. Where once there had been quiet compliance, now there was tension, challenge, even mockery. His control was slipping, and the harder he pushed, the faster it fell away. The black woman finally tilted her head, meeting his eyes with a calm that burned hotter than rage. "Is that all?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the street despite its quietness. "Insults? Violence? That's the best you have?" Her words landed heavier than any slap could. The crowd murmured, nodding. The man's face twisted, his arrogance fraying into desperation. He slammed his palm on the hood of a parked car beside them, the metallic thud ringing out like a drumbeat of frustration. "Don't test me!" he shouted. "I decide who belongs here, not you." But the declaration backfired. Someone in the crowd shouted, "No, you don't!" Another chimed in, "She does!" The voices grew, overlapping, fueled by indignation. The bodyguards exchanged uneasy glances. Their hands fell completely from her arms, as if some invisible chain had snapped. She was free now, not just physically, but symbolically. She straightened her suit jacket, the motion small but powerful. Cameras zoomed in. The gesture was more than adjustment, it was preparation. The man's chest heaved, his eyes darting between her and the restless crowd. He had entered this confrontation believing it would end with her shame. But now, with every passing second, shame was wrapping itself around him instead. And she hadn't even revealed who she was. Not yet. The street was alive with whispers, the hum of voices swelling like a tide. Dozens of eyes, dozens of cameras, all fixed on the two figures locked in confrontation. The man in the navy suit had built his confidence on control, on volume, on fear. But now, standing across from a woman who refused to flinch, his authority was unraveling thread by thread. "Why won't you say something?" he snapped, his voice cracking. He took a step closer, looming over her, desperate to provoke a reaction. "What, too proud to beg? Too scared to admit I'm right?" But she didn't move. The black woman, steady in her early 30s, let the silence stretch, her gaze unbroken. Her stillness was louder than his shouting. Each second of her calm became another crack in his armor. From the crowd, voices began to rise. A woman in her late 30s whispered, "She's not scared. Look at her." A man in his 40s added, "No, she's in control. He just doesn't see it yet." The man's fists clenched at his sides. He turned sharply to the crowd, gesturing wildly. "Don't you all see? She doesn't belong here. She's nothing. She's—" His rant cut off as he realized the eyes staring back at him weren't agreeing. They weren't nodding. They were watching him unravel, recording every word as evidence against him. Phones tilted higher, zooming closer. The soft red dots of recording lights glowed like silent warnings. The black woman finally moved, just slightly. She unfolded her arms, adjusted her jacket, and let her hands rest calmly at her sides. The motion was so subtle, yet it rippled through the crowd like a signal. She wasn't cornered. She wasn't restrained. She was choosing her moment. The man growled, frustrated. He slammed his hand on the hood of the car again, harder this time. "Say something!" His voice cracked louder. "Defend yourself! Admit you're out of your depth!" But she only tilted her head, her eyes narrowing with a calm that cut deeper than rage ever could. Her silence said everything his noise could not. "I am not beneath you. You are collapsing beneath me." The crowd picked up on it. A voice rang out from somewhere near the back. "She doesn't need to say anything. You're saying it all for her." Laughter and murmurs rippled outward, the energy turning against him in waves. The bodyguards, both in their mid-30s, shifted again, their eyes darting nervously to the cameras. They weren't protecting power anymore. They were protecting themselves from being implicated. They stepped back slightly, no longer holding her, no longer shielding him. The man's face flushed with fury and fear. He jabbed his finger at her again, his voice trembling. "This is your last chance. Walk away before I ruin you." But his threat rang hollow. The black woman drew a slow breath, letting the sound of it settle into the silence. Her lips curved, just slightly, into the faintest trace of a smile. She hadn't spoken, she hadn't lifted a hand. But everyone watching knew. The balance of power had shifted, and the man was the only one who didn't see it. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The man in the navy suit, red-faced and trembling, had lost the rhythm of control. He could feel it, see it, taste it in the way the crowd stared, not at her weakness but at his desperation. His voice rose to a shout. "You think this is some kind of game? You think standing there silent makes you strong?" He grabbed the folder of documents tucked under his arm and hurled it across the street. Pages scattered like frightened birds, fluttering over the pavement, some caught in the breeze, others trampled under shoes. Gasps tore from the crowd. A woman in her 30s clutched her chest. A man in his 40s muttered, "He's lost his mind." Phones tracked the paper storm, every angle capturing his meltdown. But she didn't flinch. The black woman in her early 30s simply shifted her weight, standing taller. Her chin lifted, her eyes steady. The papers flying around her weren't chaos, they were proof. Proof he was unraveling in real time. The man lunged forward, slamming his palm down on the hood of the car once again. The metallic bang jolted the nearest onlookers. "This is my world," he roared. His spit dotted the steel. "And you're nothing. You'll always be nothing." But the words, once heavy, now landed brittle. The bodyguards, men in their 30s, suits tight around their broad shoulders, exchanged uneasy glances. One of them shifted his weight, subtly stepping back. They were no longer holding her arms. They weren't holding anything at all. The crowd stirred louder. Someone shouted, "She's not the one losing it. You are." Another voice chimed in, "Keep recording. The world has to see this." The man's eyes darted from phone to phone, realizing how many witnesses there were. He raised his hands, waving them wildly as if to gather attention back to himself. "Don't you see?" he shouted, pointing at her. "She's a fraud. She doesn't belong here. She—" His rant cut off mid-sentence when he saw her expression. She hadn't spoken. She hadn't even moved much. But the smallest curve of her lips, the faintest suggestion of a smile, struck him harder than any words. It wasn't amusement. It wasn't mockery. It was knowledge. Knowledge that she was no victim. Knowledge that this battle wasn't his to win. The silence following that smile grew heavier than his shouting ever could. The crowd leaned in, phones tilted higher. They weren't waiting for his next move anymore. They were waiting for hers. And he knew it. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes, but he pushed it down, pounding the car once more, the sound echoing like a desperate drumbeat. "Don't just stand there," he bellowed. "Fight back. Admit you're nothing." The black woman inhaled deeply, letting the breath steady her body. Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unshaken. And though her lips barely moved, the message was clear. You've already lost. The crowd erupted in murmurs, voices rising like a storm. He had wanted to humiliate her. Instead, he had exposed himself. And everyone could see it. The noise of the street had changed. At first it had been gasps and shocked whispers. Then it turned into murmurs of disapproval, directed not at her, but at him. Now the crowd buzzed with anticipation, restless energy swirling as if they knew something monumental was about to happen. The man in the navy suit was panting, his forehead shining with sweat. He had thrown insults, raised his voice, scattered papers, even slammed his fists against steel. And yet she hadn't cracked. She hadn't moved an inch from her place of quiet power. "Why won't you speak?" he roared, his voice breaking, desperate. "Say something! Prove me wrong, or is silence all you have?" Finally, she moved. The black woman in her early 30s slid her hand into the pocket of her tailored grey suit. The crowd leaned forward, phones trembling as they zoomed in. She pulled out a sleek gold-embossed card. She held it up between her fingers, letting the sunlight catch its shine. Her voice, calm but resonant, carried over the crowd. "You think I don't belong here? You think I'm nothing?" She paused, letting the silence sharpen her words. Then she extended the card toward him. "Before you embarrass yourself further, maybe you should read this." The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed closer. The man snatched the card from her hand, his motions rough, almost frantic. He glanced at it once, then twice, his eyes widening as he realized what he was holding. Printed in bold, unmistakable letters. Chief Executive Officer. Owner. The silence that followed was deafening. Someone in the crowd whispered, "No way." Another voice shouted, "She's the CEO?" The ripple became a wave, spreading through the onlookers, each person confirming it to the next. The man's face drained of colour. He turned the card over in his hand, searching for some sign it was fake, some clue that he wasn't standing in front of the very person who outranked him in every possible way. But there was no mistake. The woman adjusted her suit jacket, her posture tall, her gaze steady. "You called me a parasite. You called me nothing. Yet you stand on property I own. You breathe air in a building I control. Tell me again, who doesn't belong here?" The crowd erupted. Cheers, claps, shouts of approval. Phones shook as people pushed closer to capture the moment. For every insult he had hurled, for every act of arrogance, there was now undeniable proof of who truly held the power. The man tried to speak, but no sound came. His throat worked, but words refused to form. His mouth opened and closed like a man drowning, gasping for control that no longer existed. The woman didn't need to say more. The evidence was in his hand, and the world had just witnessed the truth. She turned her head slightly, addressing not him, but the crowd. "Remember this moment. Power isn't about who shouts the loudest. Power is about who stands when others try to knock them down." The street roared. Applause thundered, echoing between buildings. Strangers who had doubted her minutes before now cheered her name, though they had only just learned who she truly was. And as the man stared at the card in his trembling hand, the cameras captured everything. The shift, the fall, the triumph. The gold-embossed card gleamed in his hand like a mirror, reflecting not just the truth but his own unraveling. The crowd's energy had shifted completely. No longer spectators, they were witnesses to a reckoning. Cheers and murmurs swelled, bouncing off the glass walls of the buildings, wrapping around him like chains he couldn't break. But arrogance dies hard. The man in the navy suit let out a harsh laugh, brittle and forced. "A business card? That's your big reveal?" He waved it mockingly in the air, the gold letters flashing in the sunlight. "Anyone can print a card and play dress-up." The crowd booed. A woman in her 30s called out, "She doesn't need to play, she owns this place." Another man in his 40s shouted, "Check your facts before you run your mouth." The man sneered, refusing to look shaken. He leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "So what if you sit in a fancy chair? CEOs come and go. Power comes and goes. You think a title makes you my equal? You'll never be. Not to me." The black woman, her early 30s, composure unbroken, tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a queen might regard a fool. She didn't snatch the card back. She didn't argue. She let him hold it, let him mock it, because every camera was capturing his desperation, not her defense. "You're laughing now," she said calmly, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "But it sounds an awful lot like fear." The words hit him harder than the reveal had. His smirk faltered for a moment, and the crowd roared with approval. Someone shouted, "Exactly!" Another yelled, "She's owning him right now!" The man doubled down, his voice louder, almost frantic. "Fear? Of you? Don't make me laugh. You're a figurehead, a name on paper. The real decisions are made by men who matter." The booing grew louder, drowning his words. Even the bodyguards who had once restrained her now stood to the side, their expressions unreadable, but their loyalties no longer in doubt. They were seasoned men in their 30s, but even they knew where true authority rested, and it wasn't with him. The woman let the noise of the crowd wash over him, her calm presence slicing through his chaos. She took a single step forward, narrowing the distance between them. He instinctively stepped back, just half a pace, but enough for the crowd to see, enough for the cameras to immortalize. Her eyes locked onto his. "You say power comes and goes. You're right, and right now—" She let the silence stretch, the crowd leaning in. "It's leaving you." The eruption of cheers was deafening. Phones shook in hands as people captured the moment, strangers grinning at one another as though they were part of something historic. The man's laugh came again, but this time it was hollow, an empty echo of the confidence he once carried. His grip on the business card tightened, crumpling its edges. His arrogance was slipping, his facade cracking, and she hadn't raised her voice once. The crowd's noise swelled, a chorus of disbelief and triumph rolling through the street. The man in the navy suit still clutched the crumpled card in his fist, his face pale but his voice straining with false bravado. "It doesn't matter what's printed on this," he barked. "She's nothing but a pretender, a fraud." But his words sounded small now, swallowed by the tide of onlookers who had already chosen their side. Phones hovered high, recording every second, their lenses unblinking witnesses. Then, from the edge of the crowd, movement began. A cluster of individuals in sleek suits, all in their late 30s and 40s, pushed their way forward. Their presence was sharp, deliberate, like a knife slicing through the noise. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing authority. The man frowned, his confidence faltering as he recognized a few of the faces. These weren't random supporters. These were executives, leaders of departments, people who held weight inside the very company he thought belonged to him. One of them, a woman in her 40s with steel-grey hair and a sharp gaze, stepped forward. She didn't hesitate. She didn't whisper. She bowed her head slightly toward the black woman and said, her voice steady and clear, "Madam CEO." The crowd erupted. Cheers, gasps, shouts of confirmation. Phones shook in hands as people scrambled to capture the moment. Another man, mid-30s, adjusted his tie and added, "We apologize for the disturbance. We didn't expect you to be treated this way." He too bowed his head, a gesture of respect unmistakable to anyone watching. The man in the navy suit stiffened, his jaw locking. "What are you doing?" he spat. "She's not." But the executives cut him off with their actions. One by one, they stepped closer, each addressing her directly. "We're ready for your instructions," said another, his voice carrying authority that only came from years in leadership. "Just say the word." The black woman in her early 30s didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her mere presence, their acknowledgement, was enough. She nodded once, calm and composed, as though this was nothing more than a business meeting. The crowd roared louder, the shift undeniable now. Strangers who had doubted her moments earlier were shouting her name, calling her CEO with reverence. The man's composure cracked. His voice rose, high and brittle. "This is a stunt. You're all being played." He waved the crumpled card like a shield, but it only made him look smaller, more desperate. The executives ignored him. Their focus was entirely on her. And the cameras? They drank in every second the narrative was no longer his. It had been ripped from his hands and placed firmly in hers. The black woman stood taller, letting the weight of the moment settle. She didn't need to explain herself. Others had done it for her. All she had to do was be exactly what she was, the leader, the authority, the power in the room, even if the room was a city street. And as the executives formed a subtle line at her side, the man finally realized what the crowd already knew. He wasn't facing a victim. He was standing against the one person who could dismantle him completely. The street had become a theatre, and the audience had chosen their hero. The moment the executives bowed and called her Madam CEO, the balance of power flipped like a coin landing decisively on its edge. The crowd roared. Applause and cheers rippled outward, rolling over the glass facades of the buildings. People shouted into their phones, live streams exploding with comments that scrolled too fast to read. "She's the CEO," someone yelled, voice breaking with excitement. "The guy just slapped the CEO!" The black woman stood in her light grey suit, steady as stone, her face calm but her eyes sharp with command. She didn't bask in the noise. She didn't need to. The crowd's energy was no longer against her. It was fuel for her presence. Meanwhile, the man in the navy suit looked cornered, his arrogance collapsing into something brittle. He waved the crumpled business card, desperately, shouting over the noise. "This doesn't change anything. Titles don't make leaders. She's just pretending." But his words barely reached beyond the first row of onlookers. Their focus wasn't on him anymore. A young woman in her 30s shouted back, "She doesn't need to pretend. She is the leader." Another voice echoed, "We saw how you acted. You're finished." Phones angled toward him, catching every twitch, every bead of sweat. He had started this encounter trying to make her look small. Now it was he who looked diminished, a grown man unraveling under the weight of his own arrogance. The executives at her side didn't flinch. Their respect was deliberate, practiced, undeniable. One leaned toward her and said in a low but audible voice, "The board already knows. They'll hear about this before the hour is over." The crowd caught fragments of the sentence, and the roar grew louder. "The board," someone shouted. "She's not just the CEO. She runs it all." The man's face contorted, his desperation spilling into rage. He stepped forward, jabbing his finger at her again, though his hand shook. "You think these people matter? You think their cheers make you powerful? They'll forget you tomorrow." But even as he spoke, phones buzzed with notifications. Social media posts were already spreading, clips replaying the slap, her silence, the reveal. The world wasn't going to forget, because the world was watching live. The black woman finally turned to the crowd. Her voice was steady, not raised, yet it cut through the noise. "This is what happens when arrogance meets truth. He wanted to shame me. Instead, he showed you all who he really is." The eruption of applause nearly shook the ground. People clapped, cheered, some even chanted her title, "CEO! CEO!" The man staggered back, his face pale, his bravado crumbling. For the first time, his body language betrayed him, shoulders slumped, jaw slack, eyes darting like a man searching for escape. The crowd no longer just witnessed him, they judged him, and their verdict was clear. He wasn't the powerful figure he imagined. He was a fool exposed in daylight. And she was no longer just the woman who had endured a slap. She was the black CEO, standing unbroken, her authority undeniable. The chant of "CEO, CEO" rolled like thunder down the street, drowning out traffic, drowning out his voice, drowning out everything but the truth. The man in the navy suit tried to shout over it, but his words were swallowed, devoured by the sheer force of the crowd. He raised his hands desperately. "Stop! Stop this madness! You don't understand, she's not." But no one listened. Phones hovered like spotlights, unblinking, immortalizing his unraveling. Every camera angle painted him smaller, weaker, more pathetic. His once perfect hair clung to his sweaty forehead, his sharp suit wrinkled from his flailing. He looked less like a man in control and more like a cornered animal. The black woman in her early 30s didn't move. She didn't need to. Her stillness contrasted his chaos, amplifying her power. She simply stood tall, arms loose at her sides, her presence commanding without effort. One of the executives in their 40s stepped closer, speaking firmly for all to hear. "Sir, you've disgraced yourself enough. Walk away." The man spun, pointing wildly. "You're all traitors. You think you can betray me for her? She'll ruin everything." His voice cracked, half scream, half plea. The crowd booed. Someone yelled, "You already ruined yourself." Another shouted, "We saw what you did." The boos grew louder, layered with laughter, contempt, rejection. The man stumbled backward, clutching the crumpled card still in his hand as though it could anchor him. But it had become a symbol of his defeat. Cameras zoomed in on the gold letters pressed against his trembling fingers. The image would be replayed millions of times within hours. His knees bent, and for a fleeting second it looked as if he might collapse entirely. But pride, what little he had left, forced him upright. His voice quivered, softer now, more fragile. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, eyes darting to her. "You'll regret this, all of you." But the words lacked weight. They weren't threats, they were whimpers. The black woman finally spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly over the noise. "The only regret here," she said, her tone sharp and resolute, "is yours. You thought a slap would strip me of dignity. You thought insults would silence me. But now the world sees you for what you are, weak, afraid, and irrelevant." The crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, sobs, the chant rising again. "CEO! CEO!" The man flinched as if the chant itself were striking him. He pressed his palms over his ears for a moment, his face twisting with humiliation. He looked around, but there was no escape. Every street corner was lined with phones. Every angle caught his collapse. The executive stepped in closer, not to touch him, but to shield her, an unspoken barrier of loyalty. Their silence said what needed saying. He was finished. And the man knew it. His shoulders slumped, his jaw loosened, and for the first time that day, his eyes fell to the ground. The fight had drained from him. The power he thought he had wielded had turned to dust in his hands. The street had judged him. The cameras had captured him. The black CEO had outlasted him, and he was left with nothing but shame. The crowd had fallen into a rhythm, chanting, clapping, recording, their energy like a storm gathered and focused on a single truth. The man had lost. He stood hunched, pale and trembling, clutching the crumpled card like a lifeline. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit, but there was none. The black woman in her early 30s stepped forward, closing the space between them. The executives flanked her silently, a wall of authority that no one dared to challenge. The crowd hushed, sensing the final act was about to unfold. Her voice cut through the air, measured, deliberate, sharp as glass. "Look at me." The man's head jerked up, his eyes bloodshot, his breathing ragged. "You thought a slap would strip me of my worth," she said, her words steady, each one a hammer striking the nail of truth. "You thought raising your voice would drown out my existence. You thought fear would keep me silent." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, ensuring not just he, but everyone, heard her next words. "But here's the truth. I am not defined by your hand. I am not diminished by your insult. And I will never again allow men like you to believe they can break women like me." The crowd erupted, applause shaking the street, cheers echoing between the buildings. Some people raised their fists, others screamed her name. Phones shook in hands, capturing her every word, her every movement. She lifted her hand, and the noise softened, falling into an expectant hush. "This isn't just about me," she continued, her voice lower but carrying farther. "It's about every black woman who has ever been told she doesn't belong, every leader who has been overlooked, every voice that's been silenced. Today, in front of all these witnesses, you tried to erase me, and instead you erased yourself." Her words landed like thunder. The man flinched, his shoulders collapsing inward, his head sinking lower. She took one final step forward, her presence towering though she hadn't raised her volume once. "This is my warning to you and to anyone like you. Never raise your hand to me again. Never speak to me as if I am less. Because I am not less. I am the one in charge." The roar that followed was deafening. The crowd surged with energy, their voices chanting, clapping, celebrating the moment as though history itself had just shifted before their eyes. The man staggered back, nearly tripping over the curb. He didn't dare answer her. His jaw worked, but no words came. His humiliation was complete, carved into the memory of everyone there, etched forever into the screens that recorded it all. The black woman lowered her chin slightly, her gaze softening as she turned to the crowd. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Dignity radiated from her stillness, authority from her composure. And in that moment her words lingered in the air like scripture, undeniable and unshakable. She had spoken, and her voice would not be forgotten. The roar of the crowd rolled through the street like thunder, echoing off the glass and steel of the skyline. Strangers, men and women, young and old, all well past their 20s, raised their phones higher, desperate to capture the moment from every possible angle. History wasn't being whispered behind closed doors. It was unfolding in the open, streamed in real time to thousands who would soon become millions. The man in the navy suit, once so polished and commanding, now looked small. His shoulders hunched, his fists limp at his sides. The crumpled business card was still crushed in his trembling hand, but its golden letters no longer held any meaning. He was swallowed by the booze, the chants, the laughter that followed his every move. A few steps away, the black woman in her early 30s stood tall, her light grey suit glowing under the late afternoon sun. The executives flanked her silently, but they weren't her shield. They were her acknowledgement, a living testimony of her authority. She didn't need them to validate her, yet their presence underscored what no one could deny. She was in command. She raised her chin slightly, scanning the crowd. Dozens of faces beamed back at her, admiration glowing in their eyes. They weren't just cheering her victory over him, they were celebrating what she represented. Strength, dignity, justice. A man in his 40s, holding his phone high, shouted, "That's our CEO!" The words rippled outward, repeated by others until the chant rose again. CEO! CEO! The sound was overwhelming, a living tide of recognition and respect. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, her expression carrying the quiet satisfaction of a leader who didn't need applause to know her worth. The man stumbled backward, trying to push through the crowd. No one stopped him. They didn't need to. His defeat was absolute, captured from every angle, already slipping into the digital bloodstream of the world. By the time he disappeared down the street, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale, an example of arrogance crushed by truth. The cameras turned back to her. She hadn't moved. She didn't need to. Her stillness was a portrait of authority, framed by glass towers and sunlight. One of the executives stepped closer, speaking softly but audibly enough for the crowd to hear. "Your car is ready, Madam CEO." She nodded once, calm and composed. Then she turned her gaze one last time toward the people who had witnessed everything. Her voice carried steady, rich, resolute. "Remember this. Power isn't in the noise. Power is in the truth, and the courage to stand when someone tries to strip it away." The crowd roared again, the chant surging as phones captured her words, her stance, her unshakable presence. And then she walked forward, the crowd parting for her like water, phones still raised, voices still chanting her title. The final image burned into every recording wasn't the man's collapse, nor the chaos of the confrontation. It was her, the black CEO, head high, dignity intact, walking away not as a victim, but as the undeniable leader of the moment.